Implementation Committee meeting. I'm calling the meeting to order. Today's, we have Commissioners Erlin, Lobauer, Lloyd, and Prickett participating in the meeting. And good morning, Nancy. Could you let us know what staff members are participating today? Or at least online.
I could scroll through. So Paul Lakin, Brad Minute, Gina, Betsy, Stacy, Susan, Marcy Green is joining us for our stormwater discussion. Ernie, Brian, also stormwater, and Chuck.
Very good. All right, thank you, Nancy. And we also have Craig Ambrose from the Governor's Authorities Unit on the phone. So good morning, Craig. So our first order of business is to adopt the August 28th, 2020 Policy and Implementation Committee meeting minutes. Is there a motion to adopt?
I move that we adopt them, Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Lobauer. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Commissioner Lloyd. Okay, are there any questions or comments on the August 28th minutes? Okay, all in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you. Okay, Betsy, I'd like to thank Betsy Piner for preparing the minutes. I don't know how many years you've been doing it, Betsy, but I'm sure you've done your share of minutes over the years. Chairman Lobauer, would you please update the public on the Lucy's committee meeting that was scheduled for today?
Sure. Turns out that we're going to be rescheduling the meeting to Wednesday, October 7th at 9:30 a.m. So that we can hear a presentation from Assistant Commissioner Mazzei of New Jersey DEP. And we'll have other business on that agenda too, but we wanted to accommodate the Assistant Commissioner and without hopefully losing too much time from today. So Director Wittenberg arranged all that and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Before reports are presented, I'd like to point out to the public that in order to participate in public comment today, you must call in and provide the meeting ID, which is at the top of the agenda and also on the screen. We look forward to hearing from you at that time. All right, Executive Director reports. We have the first is issuing an order to certify Manchester Township Ordinance 20-022, adopting the Whiting landfill redevelopment plan. Nancy, do you have anything you'd like to say about that before I ask Brad if he'd like to present the report?
I can.
All right, thank you. It's Brad. Brad's going to do the discussion today, or start the discussion. Good morning, Brad.
Good morning. So let me share my screen real quick so we get a couple slides up. Okay. And I'll make this full screen. All right. So I'll just ask real quick, is everyone seeing a title slide for the ordinance?
Yes.
Okay, great. Good morning, everyone. All of you should have received a draft resolution and ED report on Manchester Township Ordinance 20-022. The township adopted this ordinance back in July of this year. The purpose of the ordinance is to adopt a redevelopment plan for the former Whiting landfill site. The redevelopment plan is intended to facilitate the proper closure of the inactive landfill in accordance with the CMP and DEP regulations in conjunction with the development of a solar energy facility. As was noted previously to this committee, Manchester has been selected as one of the first round projects for the BPU Community Solar Pilot Program. Their application to the BPU proposed a 3.2 megawatt community solar project at the Whiting landfill site. The township expects that the solar facility will help offset the costs associated with the landfill closure. Before proceeding on the details of the plan, I would just like to make clear to Commission and the public that the closure of the landfill, the development of solar facilities, and any other development activities at this site would be subject to a Pinelands development application that would come before the Commission. So what is under review today, to be clear, is the adopted redevelopment plan that is simply enabling specific permitted uses at this site that I'm going to be describing momentarily. So moving along here. Okay, so looking at this first exhibit here, you're looking at the vicinity of the redevelopment area, which is highlighted in red here. It is adjacent to the New Jersey Route 70, and the redevelopment area encompasses approximately 98 acres and consists of a single lot that is owned by the township. The redevelopment area is located entirely in the Pinelands Preservation Area and the township's corresponding Pinelands Preservation Area zoning district. You can also see that the site is situated in the vicinity of a number of management areas, including the Whiting Town Management Area, a forest area directly to the south, and a military installation that is the Joint Base to the west. Moving on to the second slide here. Momentarily. All right, so this is a bit, whoop, jumped a little too far here. So while this second slide loads up, it's going to zoom into a more site level view. For some reason, we're having a little trouble. Okay. The site contains several existing municipal facilities, including a firearms training range, a composting facility, which is in this area, a recycling facility, and a municipal salt storage shed. So the redevelopment plan establishes the Whiting Landfill Redevelopment Overlay District, and it aligns with the boundary of the redevelopment area, which is the single parcel that we're looking at. So the underlying regulations of the PPA zoning district would remain in effect for the redevelopment area, except where explicitly modified by the redevelopment plan. All development in the redevelopment area remains subject to the minimum environmental standards set forth in the township's land use ordinance and CMP. So permitted uses in the overlay district would include all of the uses that are permitted in the underlying PPA zone, the existing municipal facilities on the site, and solar energy facilities. So I'm going to get into each of those briefly. So with regards to the existing uses, the plan permits 4 specific existing uses. The first 2 permitted uses are the recycling center and the composting facility. CMP permits both of these uses in the preservation area, provided that the CMP standards specific to these uses are met. Those standards have been incorporated into the redevelopment plan, and I would like to also note that both of these uses were approved by the Commission in 1990 as part of a public development application. The other 2 permitted uses include the firearms training range and salt storage shed. The CMP does not permit these uses in the preservation area district. The redevelopment plan does explicitly state that these are permitted non-conforming uses subject to the CMP's non-conforming use provisions. The township has initiated but not completed a public development application for activities related to these 2 non-conforming uses. As the township moves forward with the application, they will need to demonstrate that these uses predate the CMP in order for them to be considered legally non-conforming under the CMP. It's important to note that any expansion of a non-conforming use at the site would be subject to the approval of a public development application. Any expansion would be limited to 50% of the area or capacity of the use as of January 14th, 1981, and the expansion would need to meet all the minimum environmental standards of the CMP. With regard to the solar permitted use, the CMP does have very specific standards for solar in the preservation area. One of those limited situations in which solar is permitted in the preservation area is on an existing landfill that has been closed in accordance with the CMP or is the subject of an application to the Commission for closure. There are additional CMP solar standards that apply in the preservation area, which the redevelopment plan has incorporated. So they would include limits on the extent of the solar to previously disturbed lands that have not been restored, or portions of the parcel that are required to be disturbed for purposes of landfill closure. So in this exhibit here, there's a green outline, which is what the township's consulting engineers have provided that shows the interpreted extent of the landfill. So it certainly gives an idea of what has been previously disturbed on the site and what might be further disturbed within those boundaries as part of a closure process. Again, the specifics of the extent of the disturbed lands and the extent of the solar facilities would be subject to a Pinelands application and applicable CMP rules. So additionally, it includes limits on clearing for on-site and off-site infrastructure to only that which is necessary to accommodate the solar facility. And it also includes provisions for the decommissioning of a solar facility within 12 months of the cessation of use. Moving on to the aspects related to the landfill closure, just a couple more details. A plan for the closure of the Whiting landfill was approved by the Commission in 1990, but has yet to be implemented due to the financial burden of the closure cost. The redevelopment plan is intended to facilitate this closure in conjunction with the development of the solar facilities that would offset those costs. As a bit of background, when the CMP for the preservation area went into effect in September of 1980, existing landfills in the preservation area were required to cease operation immediately. The CMP requires that those landfills be capped with an impermeable material or otherwise appropriately closed in accordance with the CMP. The township's landfill closure plans are now the subject of a new pending development application, which must be completed prior to or simultaneously with any application for the solar development. In recent months, the township and commission staff have been working jointly to reevaluate appropriate methods for closing the Whiting landfill in accordance with the CMP. Ultimately, the commission staff will be providing a recommendation to commission as to whether an impermeable cap remains necessary or if other methods for closure are appropriate. So just to reiterate the order of operations here, the redevelopment plan enables the development of the solar facilities, but that prior to the development of the solar, the landfill would need to be appropriately closed in accordance with the CMP. Wrapping up, the commission staff held a public hearing on this ordinance. No testimony was received and no written comment was received during the written comment period. So in conclusion, the executive director has found that Manchester Township Ordinance 20-022 complies with the CMP and recommends certification of the ordinance by the commission. Today, staff is requesting that the P&I committee make a recommendation to the full commission to certify the ordinance under consideration. So at this time, I'm happy to answer any questions that commissioners might have.
Thank you, Brad. Commissioners, do you have questions, comments? Mark?
I do have questions. Thank you, Chairman. Brad, could you put that last slide back up on the screen?
Certainly.
I have a question about the green area.
Just let me know when you see it.
Yes, I see it. Thank you.
Okay.
So the green area, the green outline is surrounding the area that, as far as the township knows, was where the active landfill used to be. And I presume by that any cap that will have to be installed would have to cover that green outline. Is that right? Assuming a cap is still required, I heard you say that they may consider, and we may allow some alternative approach to an impermeable cap over the landfill.
Yeah, and that is my understanding, Commissioner. And in fact, I'm not sure if Ed Wengrowski might have any additional information on that. I know he's been one of our staff members that's been working on the township with regard to closure. Ed, was there anything that you might want to provide on that?
Well, good morning, Commissioners. Well, the one thing that I would add was that there was a impermeable capping plan approved for this landfill. Forgive me for not having the exact date, but it was back in the 1990s, I believe. And I read that report, and what that report identified was that a portion of this landfill was used as a vegetative waste landfill. So essentially stumps and things of that nature. And the original approved impermeable capping plan excluded the impermeable cap from that area which received just vegetative waste. Now, I don't know, I've never seen a map that differentiates between where the municipal solid waste, there was septage disposed of at this landfill. But if they have a plan that was prepared by their engineer at the time that distinguishes the extent of the what I'll call the sanitary waste from the vegetative waste, then our rules would exclude the impermeable cap requirement for the vegetative waste portion and only apply it to that section that contained, probably the much larger section, but I don't know, that contained the sanitary waste.
Now, Ed, do we know where they're planning to install the solar vis-a-vis the vegetative portion of the landfill or all of that area? I mean, do we have any idea? It's not shown on the map where the solar would go.
Right. Now, I haven't seen those plans. Maybe Brad has. I will tell you that I'm scheduled to participate in a meeting next month with Mazer Consulting, is the municipality's engineering consultant on the project, DEP, and Pinelands. So we'll get into it a little bit further then. We have really only had very limited discussions with Mazer to this point. We alerted them. They didn't know that there was a previously approved impermeable capping plan that was done by a prior administration back in the 1990s. So we advised them of that. It's my understanding that our regulatory programs office has shared that capping plan with them, but they've suggested that they want to pursue alternatives. And it's my understanding that DEP issued a landfill disruption permit, a minor disruption permit, that has allowed the consultant to go out there and do test pits and borings to explore the area to try and, I guess, nail down exactly the extent of where this waste is. And I suspect that they will probably cite the solar based upon their findings of that investigation. We haven't seen those results just yet.
Okay, because
yeah, and Commissioner Lober, I could add, while I don't know for sure that the township has submitted any application materials to the commission related to solar yet, having looked at their application that they submitted as part of the pilot program for BPU, they included a site plan that kind of limited, that showed the extent of where they proposed the solar to go. And if you can see the cursor on my screen, it sort of is limited to this area bounded by the green on the east and south, but then by the unimproved roads to the north and west. So pretty much just in this area.
Although that appears to be a majority of the area. So my only concern about it is, and I realize our action today would not authorize the solar project, that would come back to us later and we'll have more time to look at this in detail. But I just wanted to voice the concern that should solar be built there, much as I think that's a wonderful outcome for a landfill, especially in the Pinelands, great place to put solar. In this case, I'd be concerned whether or not that would impede the township's ability to install an appropriate cap over the landfill and protect the water below. Once they install piers, that I imagine would be a part, unless this is going to be a floating system that I've heard of, it might get in the way of the ability to install a proper impermeable system covering the landfill, which we required of them some 30 years ago. And, our interest, I'm sure, is still there. I mean, I'd be interested to know what we're seeing, what the township has been seeing from the monitoring wells, for example, whether they're detecting any leachate coming off that might be harmful as a result of the waste that has been stored in the landfill. So while I won't have any opposition to this today, it allows the project to move forward for further consideration. I think that's fine, but in the future, I want to know more about how the solar installation might affect the ability to cap this landfill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Ed, do you have any questions, comments?
Yeah. Yes, I do. Thank you. Brad, as I understand it, the entire tract is 98 acres. Do you know how many acres is within the green marked off portion of the map that you just showed?
Off the top of my head, I do not. I could probably pull that together by the end of the meeting. I could give you an answer, but off the top of my head, I don't have that at my disposal.
I mean, it's not critical for today, but
Okay.
I'd be interested in it when this comes before the commission.
Okay.
And the second question is what electric utilities territory is this tract in? I'm assuming Atlantic Electric, but the reason I asked is where is the connection to the utility grid? Because that sometimes is a limiting factor for the placement of solar. I'm just wondering how it's being handled here.
Sure. What I can say is that based on the application to the BPU, it is in the Jersey Central Power and Light service territory. Beyond that, I don't really know the details of how it would be connecting into the grid and impacts on the existing infrastructure there. But I can say it's JCP&L.
Okay, thank you. And I guess that triggers one more question for me. As I recall, there was a 12 megawatt limit on the development of solar, I think in the Pines. And I wondered if this is marked against JCP&L's portion of that.
Are you speaking to a limit based on the pilot program or some other?
It may have been the pilot program. I guess I remember when we had a presentation on community solar, my recollection is that there was a limit on the number of megawatts each utility could develop and maybe that's pilot program. And 12 megawatts sticks in my head. That may have been Atlantic Electric's allocation. I just wondered, and this will go against JCP&L, I presume, and I don't remember hearing what their limit was, but whether this in fact becomes part of the pilot program and limits the ability of the utility to do more than whatever's been allocated to it.
Okay, I might be able to answer a little bit of that. I'm not sure I remember exactly the 12 megawatt limit, but in any case, so this is one of 3 facilities in the Pinelands area that received approval from BPU in the first round of the community solar pilot program. So this is one, it's the only one for JCP&L in the Pinelands area. The other 2 are in Woodbine, down at the very other end of the Pinelands, if you will. So yes, this would count. I mean, this was definitely counted in JCP&L's total when they allocated throughout the state different percentages to the utility. So this one definitely is counted in that first round. But again, I mean, there were, I don't know, 20 or 30 applications in the Pinelands area, and only 3 were selected in that first round. So this is one. And the details that you're asking, where would it connect and all of that may be available as part of that application to BPU, but more likely would be worked out when they actually design the facility and apply to the commission. We would ask those same questions to look at, where is the infrastructure going? Where exactly is it sited on the property? How much, the CMP requires they sited on the disturbed portion of the parcel, not in the areas that are currently wooded and undisturbed. So there's a number of standards at play here that we would take a close look at, and you would get to evaluate as part of a public development application. But as far as the community solar part of this goes, really all we know is what we can glean from the BPU record, which is, yes, this counts for JCP&L's total. And this is one of 3 in the Pinelands area for now. They're going to be working on a new round shortly.
Thank you. Thank you, Sue, and thank you, Brad.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Ed. Sean, do you have any questions or comments on this report?
No, I'm good. I think you guys are asking all the right questions. I'm good.
Thank you, Sean. All right. I have a few questions. First of all, the sequence. I think Mark brought up a good point, and that is if the solar goes down first, then how do you cap? And the report talks about the goal of, the part of the goals of doing the solar is to offset the costs associated with the appropriate landfill closure. So can Brad or Susan, can you give me any ideas as far as the sequence? Wouldn't they have to do the capping first?
Yes.
And would any applications that would come before the commission require them to do that first?
Yes. So they may submit one application with both, the solar and the landfill closure together. They may be separate applications, but installation of the solar can't happen until the landfill closure is done, whether it's an impermeable cap, if that's ultimately required, or whether there's some other measures. Ed could probably give you an idea of what some of those alternative measures might be. If it's not an impermeable cap, it might be a soil cap. There's some other ways that we're looking at with them. But that work would all have to be approved by the commission, both the solar and the landfill capping. And then in terms of the actual development activity, the landfill closure work would have to occur first before any development could occur on top of that. So you're concerned about the solar somehow impeding the cap. I don't think that really would happen, because the closure plan would have to be implemented before construction of the solar facility on top of it could occur. I want to make sure. We're really just at the very beginning of this whole process, right? There's still going to be a lot of information and a lot of analysis that needs to unfold through the development application process, all of which, the commission ultimately will get to see and approve. And that would include, what has to be developed first on the site. So you'll get to see all
Thank you. I just want to make sure that our approving the redevelopment plan doesn't, tie our hands on.
Oh, no. Actually, I see it as a really good first step, because it's enabled us to sort of open this dialogue with the township. When we received this plan, that was sort of our first inkling that they were, wanting to definitely proceed. It gave us an opportunity to sit down with all of their consultants and talk about the work that would be necessary to evaluate landfill closure alternatives. So that has triggered that process, which is a good thing. And so this is really just to I think the township's doing this to recognize that they received this approval from BPU. They're serious about proceeding. They want to enable the solar facility. And now, we're in the midst of a good discussion and evaluation with them to get the landfill appropriately closed, which is all of our goals, I think.
Susan and maybe Brad and Ed, I'm just wondering, is it possible that a minimal amount of closure work needs to be done here? Because it's been so many years, and I know we have reviewed some of the DEP data from the wells that surround the site. Might it be possible that very little needs to be done once the landfill is further evaluated?
I'm gonna let Ed answer that.
Well, that's certainly within the realm of possibilities. The commission has a rule that basically says that if a landfill is producing leachate, and this one certainly is, although your point is well taken, the amount of leachate produced in the early years after its closure is very likely substantially greater than would be the case today. But if that leachate that's being produced is reaching a nearby wetland stream, that leachate has the potential to interact with receptors. If there's a direct pathway where the organisms in that wetland or stream could come in contact with that leachate, then remediation is necessary. It very well could be the case that in these 30 years, essentially most of the highest concentrations have leached out. What's coming out now is much more dilute. And it could be the case that that weaker leachate is no longer posing a threat to the ecosystem that may be receiving it, but we're a long way from reaching that determination.
Well, I just think the commissioner should be, aware that that's a possibility if they're not already. Hey, I got to tell you, I was driving past that landfill around 1980, and I remember when the garbage trucks were going in there. So I had some firsthand experience with that landfill quite a while ago.
What day in 1980 was that, Rick?
Well, I started at probably March 5th.
Yeah. Chairman, I do have another question, if you'll permit. It appears that, the closure hasn't happened for the past 30 years because no doubt cost was a big issue for them. And perhaps, as Ed Wengrowski was just saying, perhaps it won't be so great an obstacle now if conditions are, less problematic there. But assuming that it does remain a problem, the financing, would our Pinelands Infrastructure Trust program be able to support the closure effort here?
No, I mean, that's an interesting idea, but right now the infrastructure trust fund monies are limited to regional growth area projects. And this is in the preservation area district, about as opposite from that as you can get. So
yeah. Okay, right. Sorry, forgot that.
no, it's a good idea. I like it. And we have I guess the problem there would be, we have a whole list of these landfills that are in a very similar situation, and you'll be seeing a number of those as they come in. And it would be nice if the commission could fund all of that work, but
this one is the only one that has the infrastructure of community solar that's being applied that might be in jeopardy if we don't get the closure issue resolved.
Well, the Woodbine project, the Woodbine Community Solar Project that I mentioned is in a similar situation.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yes.
All right, never mind.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, never mind. Bad idea.
I have a question about the salt dome or the salt shed and the firearms range. It was mentioned that something about proving that it predated, these two facilities predated the CMP. I was wondering, is the only need to prove that these things predated the CMP if the situation was that the township wanted to expand those facilities, or do they need to do that for some other reason?
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to that. I think so the township had initiated an application related to these two uses because there had been some changes, in more recent years. The township sort of paused that application process when they started putting together this proposal for the solar facility, because they were hoping to kind of wrap it all together in a single comprehensive application for the site. I would have to, in terms of more details on that, I would have to defer to Director Horner as to any further details about the applications that were sort of pending here.
Chuck, are you?
I'm here. Commissioner, I think, well, the answer to your question is that yes, they have to establish that it legally existed, any facility, any use legally existed as of 1981 to qualify for the 50% expansion. So yes, is the answer to your question. I don't remember all the details of this one, but I believe we have accepted the fact that the facilities, at least the gun range, and what was the second one you mentioned?
The salt shed.
And that a salt shed use existed on this parcel as of 81.
Okay.
Sometimes that can be a tortured process, as you can well imagine, establishing what existed as of 1981. But based on the evidence that we had and the information that was provided, that we accepted that premise.
Well, I know from my experience, DEP had grants, and they may still have grants for municipalities to build salt sheds. I think there was a focus on building salt sheds probably 2002 onward. Before that, we probably know that, you know, salt piles might have been covered with tarps or nothing at all.
Correct.
So I'm just interested in knowing a little bit more. Certainly a salt shed or a salt dome is important, and fire range is also important. But just was interested, and I also wonder, are there any violations on this site that need to be mentioned at this point? Do we know of any violations?
Off the top of my head, I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay.
But I can assure the commission that if there are any violations out there, that those would have to be addressed before any application moved forward with the commission.
Okay, and usually we see that on the application report, I think. On
Well,
the
yes, but
executive
but even prior to that, before you even got the information, we would have made them address the violation if it exists as part of any application to us.
Okay. All right. I think they're the questions that I had, and thank you all for responding to all of our questions so thoroughly. Much appreciated. There's certainly a lot more depth to this application than I originally thought when I was reviewing it. So commissioners, is there anything else you'd like to say before we take a vote to move this to the full commission?
I'll just add, this is Sean, that I'm in favor of the application moving forward to the full commission. And if you need a motion, I'll make that motion.
Okay.
Second.
Is there a second?
I'll
Mark?
second.
Was that Ed?
Go ahead, Ed.
Either one of them.
Okay. Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, very good. All right, we also have another ordinance to consider today. It's issuing an order to certify Winslow Township Ordinance 0-2020-19, adopting the Churchill redevelopment plan. And Susan, is this your presentation?
No, this is also Brad. He's very busy.
Wow, Brad.
Brad.
Busy day.
Hey, welcome. Thank you.
All right, moving right along. All right, so again, commissioners, you should have received a draft resolution and executive director's report for Winslow Township Ordinance 0-2020-19. The township adopted this ordinance back in July of this year. The purpose of the ordinance is to adopt a redevelopment plan for the Churchill redevelopment area. So I just want to get this slide up. All right, so someone could just confirm that they're seeing a map.
Yes, we see.
All right, great. So in this first exhibit, we're showing the existing conditions of the redevelopment area, which is highlighted in red. The redevelopment area consists of 4 lots. It is located between New Jersey State Route 73 over on this side here and Cooper's Folly Road over on this side. The redevelopment area is approximately 15 acres, all of which is located in the township's regional growth area. The vast majority of that land was zoned Pinelands Major Commercial, with a 1/4 acre portion that was zoned high density residential, which is this little sort of flag lot stem here. The purpose of the current redevelopment area contains an existing professional office right up in this area, and the remainder of it is vacant and wooded. The purpose of the redevelopment area is to encourage a redevelopment with a mix of uses, including professional offices and senior housing. So to that end, the redevelopment proposes 2 different overlay districts for the redevelopment area. There's the professional office overlay district and a senior residential overlay district. So the professional office overlay is approximately 6.36 acres, while the senior residential overlay is approximately 8.64 acres. The redevelopment plan would also permit a redeveloper to develop the entire tract based on the existing standards of the PC2 zoning, underlying zoning district. So the professional office overlay district would permit business offices, professional offices, as well as any other uses permitted in the underlying PC2 zoning district, which includes a variety of non-residential uses such as research facilities, retail stores, banks, and restaurants. The senior residential overlay district would permit memory care facilities, assisted living facilities, and age-restricted independent living facilities, and any other senior residential facility that is substantially similar in nature and impact. The senior residential overlay district limits a maximum of 213 units. That 213 unit count would include memory care units, even though under the CMP, we consider memory care units to be an institutional use. The township has decided that they want to include memory care use as part of that overall, limitation on intensity of development here. Within the regional growth area, the CMP permits a wide variety of uses, provided that residential density and opportunities for the use of Pinelands development credits are appropriately accommodated. The uses that are included in the plan are all permitted in the growth area. Specifically, the CMP expressly authorizes assisted living facilities in regional growth areas, provided that they establish a maximum density and accommodate PDCs. So the density has been established with this cap on units, and the requirements for PDC use are also incorporated, which I will talk about further on momentarily. So the permitted density in the redevelopment area is higher than what the CMP calls for in the Winslow Regional Growth Area. The underlying commercial zoning district would not allow for any residential units without a variance. So the additional 213 units would be an increase in the overall residential zoning capacity of the regional growth area. The CMP provides that municipalities have the ability to zone portions of their regional growth areas for higher densities, provided that the lands in question are appropriate for more intensive development, that the infrastructure exists or can be provided to support the density, and that appropriate opportunities for Pinelands development credits are sufficiently involved. Staff has detailed in the report, in the executive director's report, its findings that the plan meets these standards. I'm just going to highlight a few of those. So just to say, in the big picture, the township has been actively planning to encourage increased residential density along New Jersey Route 73 to support commercial development. The level of density enabled at this site aligns with the township's long-term planning goals for increased residential density in that area. The senior residential overlay district is adjacent to the Camden County Library and in the vicinity of the Winslow Township's Senior Center, the Winslow Township Middle School, High School, and as well as a recently completed 264 unit apartment complex. So the intensity of the development here is sort of, is definitely in keeping with the sort of the compatibility of the development in the area. Both water and sewer are available. The plan also provides appropriate design regulations, including a maximum height of 4 stories or 60 feet, and a 15-foot landscape buffer around the entirety of the tract. The senior residential overlay district doesn't contain any wetlands or required wetlands buffers. And just to note that, any development here would still need to comply with the minimum environmental standards of the CMP. With regard to Pinelands development credits, the plan requires the acquisition and redemption of PDCs for 25% of all residential units in the redevelopment area, with limited exemptions applicable to units made affordable to low income and moderate income households. Residential units include both assisted living and independent living units. As I mentioned earlier, memory care facilities are considered institutional uses under the CMP, and therefore would not be subject to any sort of PDC requirement. The result is that, you know, there is a maximum opportunity for the use of 43 rights or 10.75 PDCs if this site was built out completely with either assisted living or independent living units. So that's kind of the maximum cap. And I would just say, Commission staff held a public hearing on this ordinance. Again, no testimony was received, nor were any written comments received during the written comment period. In conclusion, the executive director has found that the Winslow Township Ordinance O-2020-19 complies with the CMP and recommends certification of the ordinance by the commission. Today, staff is requesting that the committee make a recommendation to the full commission to certify the ordinance under consideration. And once again, I'm happy to take any questions from commissioners on this ordinance.
Thank you, Brad.
Chairman, I have a question, if I
Sure, go ahead, Mark.
may. I'll begin by saying that I think this is very sensible development in both cases. I mean, the commercial development along Route 73 is consistent with what is already there adjacent to this site. The senior housing development on Cooper Folly Road is also very sensible considering the other uses that are already in place. My only concern about this is that in my work, I deal with public uses in business districts, and a common complaint that I hear from residents of assisted living facilities, senior facilities like this one, is that it can be very difficult for the residents to gain access to common retail and professional needs that they need often more frequently than the average, younger resident who goes shopping with a car, will shop maybe once every week or 2 weeks even, whereas a senior maybe needs more often small trips to grocery, frequent trips to pharmacy, frequent trips to doctors. It strikes me that by having these two facilities located the way they are, the commercial versus the senior, we're going to be requiring any seniors who want to access any of the desirable commercial that's going to be located behind them, that they're going to have to go out Cooper Folly Road and then up the very busy Route 73 to get into this commercial district, which may have doctor's offices, it may have pharmacy, it may have convenience retail. We don't really know just yet what it will have all told, but all of these features would make a lot of sense to install that close to such a large senior residence. I just hate the idea of having to force those seniors to get in cars or get in other transportation to get out onto those busy roads. And wouldn't it be great if there were a way for them to access the commercial area from the back of their residential area, which I understand is now going to be, surrounded by a landscape buffer, which probably would preclude access to the rear of the commercial area. But I think it would be a great idea if we suggested that to the applicant, that they consider some kind of rear access for the seniors to make it safer for them and closer, easier. Some of them might even be able to do it by walking. That's all, Chairman.
Thank you, Mark. Ed, anything you'd like to say?
Yes, thank you. My initial thought was to ask whether the senior housing development, that whether there were any provisions for clustering that. And in light of what Mark just said, I'm starting to think, is there a way to use mixed use on the site to accommodate what some of the concerns Mark raised, so that one, we could have the housing cluster, two, we could have easy access to commercial entities that seniors would need. So I wondered, to what extent is clustering, are we capable of doing clustering here, and to what extent might we be able to promote mixed residential and office use?
So,
Yep.
right off the top of my head, when clustering, to me, when I think of clustering, I think of, for the most part, single family detached units clustered together and then common open space, right? So here we're talking about perhaps one or two buildings. They'll end up looking like apartment buildings, 40 feet, 3 or 4 story buildings, in which the either memory care or assisted living or the senior independent living units will be housed. So you're not talking about a sprawling development across the senior housing overlay portion of the site. It's going to be the 200 units in maybe 1 or 2 buildings that are, next to each other on a small portion of the site, and the rest of it would be either open space or, low intensity facilities for the residents. So to me, that is kind of like clustering. They're going to be in these 2 buildings, say, and the rest of the site will not be developed for housing. So, and yes, we are definitely a proponent of mixed use development and mixed use projects. The CMP doesn't require that, but we do frequently discuss that with our municipalities, and most of them are very much in favor of it, at least these days. This redevelopment plan in particular came in sort of 2 separate pieces. One, to recognize the already existing office development on 73. So I think if this were a completely vacant site, there might have been more of an opportunity to talk about a mixture of uses. But here they were really trying to recognize what was already there. And as Brad mentioned, the township has for many years now been looking at its entire Route 73 corridor. This is the approach basically you're going to be seeing from them in the upcoming months as well for other portions of the growth area, where they really are determined to focus commercial uses along Route 73 with residential behind and not interspersed altogether. So it is mixed use development. It's not quite maybe what we would view as mixed use development, where the uses are perhaps, apartments over retail. That's not happening here. You may see that in some other redevelopment areas from Winslow coming up. But this has really been their approach, which is put the commercial along the highway and the residential uses behind it. In this case, the commission views the assisted living as a residential use. I'm not sure the township would define it that way. To them, it's more of a long-term care institutional facility. But that is Winslow's approach, which is separate these things. And that doesn't, Mark, we'll have to look and see if the redevelopment plan talks about providing interconnections between this facility and the commercial. I don't know that it does, but that doesn't mean that we can't ask the township if that's something that would be considered. They are working here with a specific redeveloper. So the redevelopment plan is designed to accommodate and facilitate a project that they have in mind, but I think it's worth our reaching out to them and asking, how are they considering that, that the office or the medical or whatever facilities that might be on Route 73 could very well be related to this residential facility, and could there be an interconnection? I don't know the answer to that, but we can certainly ask them if that's something they're considering.
It might even make it easier for the developer to recruit the tenants for that commercial area.
Absolutely, if it's marketed as one, right? Yes, absolutely. So
thank you, Susan.
We will ask.
Sean, do you have any questions or comments?
They're gonna. Yeah, a couple actually. So they're once they finalize a redeveloper and have a design, they'll have to come back in front of the commission as well, right?
Oh, they'll have to be a development. Yeah, they haven't even started a development application. That will have to be right. They'll have to go through the whole process. Yes. So,
and then just to piggyback on Mark's comment, and he probably knows this better than I, if it's an assisted living facility, is that something that encourages people to come and go and to leave and shop, or is it, once you're in, you're in? I'm trying to say that in the most politically correct way, but just a question in that regard.
Yeah, there are varying levels of status for assisted living, and some are quite independent. So, yeah, obviously, the more independent you are, the more you are on your own to do that shopping. So.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, thank you.
Commissioner Erlin, I can just speak. There are, parking requirements in part of the redevelopment plan that, give a certain number of spaces per units. So, I think there's some acknowledgement that some of the residents may have cars Also, people visiting them may utilize those spots. Also, usually a lot of these facilities will have some sort of small, sort of maybe like a bus or a van that could take residents out to, various retail or healthcare related, locations.
Good. Well, thank you. And as my closing comment, I'll just say, again, I'm in favor of the application and moving it for the entire commission. If a motion's in order, I'll make it.
I'll second it.
I have a question or a comment, and that is having to do with the memorandum of understanding that water, another source of water other than the Kirkwood Cohansey source be provided once we meet a certain threshold. And I know we've talked a lot about that over the years. My question is, so when an application would come before the commission, the amount of water would be evaluated to determine whether the water had to come from another source or could be taken out of the Kirkwood Cohansey. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And that's, not that long ago that the commission signed the amended memorandum of understanding with Winslow that sets, lays all that out and puts in the maximum limits and talks about the alternative sources, which, yes, that would be a factor in evaluating an application of this magnitude. And certainly, and I've sort of alluded to it a couple of times, you're going to be seeing additional redevelopment plans and zoning changes from Winslow that would also be a concern there as well. So I think maybe not this project, but future projects in the growth area in Winslow, that will definitely become a factor, and it would trigger the need for the water supply from another source. Absolutely. So we're keeping.
So you feel we have the tools that we need to
yes.
to determine.
Yes.
Okay, great, Susan. Okay, Sean, did you make a motion to move this application to the full commission for their consideration?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Commissioner Erlin. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Lovauer. Okay, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, any abstentions? All right. We move it to the full commission, I guess, for the October meeting. All right, thank you very much. So our next order of business is an update on the Monroe Township Municipal Utilities Authority monitoring agreement. Nancy, what are we doing here?
We are following up on a question that was posed, I believe, at prior meetings. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes. This is something, Rick, that you asked about maybe at the last meeting, because I think I had included a little update about it in the monthly report. So it must have caught your attention. So Gina's here. I can see her in my bottom corner, and
Thanks for being here, Gina.
She's got a presentation and some slides to show you. This is an old agreement, so it goes back a long time. So she'll show you where it came from and how old it is, and what the status is today.
Well, that's great. Thank you. And welcome, Gina.
Thank you. So I'm going to pull up my presentation. You can see it?
Yep.
Yes.
Very good. So good morning. I just am going to do a brief summary and update on the hydrologic monitoring agreement. This isn't one of our MOAs or MOUs in the sense that some others are. It was a hydrologic monitoring agreement. And it was created because Monroe wanted to change their sewer service area and extend sewers further into the Pinelands area. And at the time, the commission said, before we grant agreement on that water quality management plan amendment, we want you to address the transfer of water from the Atlantic Basin to the Delaware River Basin. So essentially, this would transport allowing them to extend the sewers further into the Pinelands would allow export of water from the Pinelands, not through a water pipe, but through the sewers, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
So back in it was actually before 1990, and about 1987, the Mount Monroe Township MUA first came to the commission and to DEP with this water quality management plan amendment. Well, I think it was called 208 back then, 208 plan. But through several years of negotiations, they developed this hydrologic monitoring agreement, and they signed it in 1990. The agreement required stream monitoring in the Great Egg Harbor River Basin on a couple of points on the stream, and it required sewer discharge monitoring, and it required reporting on all of that. So there was just a segment of time where they had to do the stream monitoring to establish a baseline, and then they went forward with only reporting the sewer and water use. So the amendment was signed, the agreement was signed, and they got their water quality management plan amendment, 208 amendment. Under the hydrologic monitoring agreement, the Monroe Township MUA is limited to discharging no more than 3 million gallons per day of sewage. That flow is discharged through the Gloucester County Utility Authority pipe at the Delaware River. The MUA reports water and sewer discharge, which we review every month. And with the reporting, we know that 90% of the water that they discharge comes from the Great Egg Harbor River Basin. Not all of that is within the Pinelands area, but most of it is. Oh, I wanted to also mention with this slide. So with the monitoring, the commission staff was able to determine that about 90% of the discharge comes from the Atlantic Basin, the Great Egg Harbor River Basin. So using that knowledge, the commission staff recommended this trigger point that I mentioned here at the bottom of the slide, where when their sewer discharge reaches about 2.4 to 2.7 million gallons per day, then we would require a second round of stream flow monitoring to see if there's any impact from withdrawing the water from the Kirkwood-Cohansey and the Great Egg Harbor River Basin and discharging it to the Delaware. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay. So I just wanted to give you a picture of the geography that's discussed in this agreement. Here's the Pinelands boundary in green. The sewer service area that was allowed with the water quality management plan amendment is this gray hatched area. And then it discharges over here up in the inset. You can see this blue area. One of the reasons that this watershed that's blue is so darkly colored, meaning it has surplus water, is because the Gloucester County Utility Authority has their discharge pipe over here. So the Monroe Township Utility Authority pipe travels after their wastewater treatment plant. It travels to the Gloucester County pipe and out to the river. So that just kind of gives you a picture of what we're talking about. And this whole blue area is the Atlantic Basin, the Great Egg Harbor River watershed. So now we'll review the discharge data from the past 3 years. Remember that the trigger point for additional stream monitoring was recommended by commission staff to be in the range of 2.4 to 2.7 million gallons per day. So over on the y-axis, that's in million gallons per day, and this is the date across the bottom. Starting in 2000, we have much more data, obviously, but I just couldn't, the slide would have been ridiculous if I included any more. So I've just gone back to January of 2017. The gaps, I think, were not gaps in reporting, but they were gaps in our paperwork at the commission office. So you can see that they, in general, have maintained discharge well below the trigger point. The only time that they got close was about a year ago, when they were discharging above 2.5 million gallons per day. I have highlighted it here with this lovely pink ellipse. And we began to be concerned, but obviously they were too. And in March of 2019, they instituted a program to detect and repair infiltration and inflow to their sewer system. This was also a wet period, so the infiltration and inflow was likely higher at this time. So since they instituted that program, you can see they have brought their sewer discharge back down to closer to their average discharge volume. And here we are. All
stormwater infiltration, you're saying, Gina?
Correct. So infiltration implies groundwater infiltration into the pipes, and inflow is normally meaning stormwater inflow from the surface.
Okay.
So inflow and infiltration is just the combined influence of stormwater and groundwater into the pipes, into the collection system.
So now they're doing a better job of separating the stormwater from the sewer system.
Right. They've done repairs. Sometimes to repair inflow, they'll replace manhole covers, whole manhole units. And that takes care of the stormwater inflow usually. The infiltration, leaky pipes are a much bigger deal. I don't know exactly the details of what their I&I repair has been, but that's what usually happens. Sometimes they line the pipes, sometimes they dig them up and replace them. So, yeah. But you have to consider that I&I was also discharge of Kirkwood Cohansey water for the most part.
Gina, can I make a comment? And that is by initiating this program and reducing the number of million gallons of discharge, I think they're probably saving themselves money, because isn't that what they—
Absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm sure that the Gloucester County, I don't know the details of their agreement with GCUA, but usually there's a contract that says this million gallons per day, you're paying this much money. And yeah, I'm sure there's some rate that they want to stay under. And they also don't want to have to treat that water at their wastewater treatment plant, because that's costs money too.
Yeah.
And that saves taxpayers dollars, I would think.
I would think so. So this is just to show you their water use that they also report. And this I think is what triggered the question at the meeting last month, because why did we do that? So one of the things in the Water Supply Advisory Council, they had noted that water use this year under the social distancing / quarantine was higher than usual. And we also noted that in the Monroe Township Utility Authority reports. So you can see that in general, yes, there's some seasonal variation in the volume of water they use every day. But here in the summer of 2020, it's quite a bit higher than normal. The only other time that it got close to that in the past couple of years was this one time in July. But here it's consistently higher until it dropped off. I guess they stopped filling their pools in August. And so it dropped back down a little bit, but it's still well above, what they were typically using. So it's just an interesting tidbit that we see in their report. And it's consistent with what they were seeing across the state in terms of water use. So just to conclude, the terms of the hydrologic monitoring agreement are being met by Monroe Township. They're keeping their discharge down. They're reporting every day. The system is operating according to plan. And we don't see any need to start the second round of stream flow monitoring, which they had agreed to pay for if and when it occurs.
Mm-hmm.
So that is about it. If you have any other questions.
Well, I'm glad you did your presentation and refresh our memories of this program and the memorandum of agreement. Commissioners, do you have any questions or comments?
Kudos to Monroe Township. And,
yeah.
Thank you, Gina.
Yeah.
Ed, anything?
Well, just congratulations again, because this is exactly what we should be doing, addressing I&I and conserving water everywhere we can. So congratulations to Monroe and to our staff for doing a great job on this.
Yeah, I agree. Sean?
No, I just want to say thank you, Gina, for a great presentation.
You're welcome.
I hope that the elected officials are very happy, with this monitoring, in that hopefully it saves the money, saves taxpayers money on their water bills and saves them money on their wastewater bills. And it really benefits everybody. So Gina, thank you. And perhaps that's why I asked the question at the last meeting. But I certainly think we need to review these MOAs occasionally, as we usually do, and see how successful they really are. So thank you very much.
Yep. Have a good day.
You too. Okay. Our next order of business is a discussion of the recommended CMP amendments related to stormwater management.
Okay, so we've been building up to this, several meetings going on now that we've been talking about stormwater rules, and we have a presentation today. Is Marcy doing the presentation?
Yes.
Marcy Green, who's been writing rules for us and doing a really great job, is going to do the presentation. Just to offer you a little console, Mark, because we're delaying the meeting by a couple of weeks. This does relate to climate change significantly. So you get a little bit of it, not as much as you wanted, but at least we have something.
Okay, great.
Susan, you have anything you want to say? Susan, do you have anything?
Oh, no, just Marcy's going to run through the presentation with help from Brian. I can see him on my screen, and hopefully Ed is still with us.
Brian.
To pitch in with some of the technical details. But I think we're very happy with what you're going to see this morning. We spent a lot of time. It's been a big staff effort across all the offices participating to come up with these recommendations. And we hope you're going to like them as much as we do.
Well, welcome, Marcy.
Thank you. Good morning, commissioners. It's good to see you again. I met you briefly at a prior meeting, but I'm happy to be back to discuss stormwater. As you recall, Gabe Mahon from DEP presented at the May meeting to discuss the DEP changes to its stormwater rule. And since then, we've been, as Susan said, staff has been meeting, lots of discussions to figure out how to best adapt the CMP amendments to the DEP rule to kind of thread the needle between the two. So this presentation will go over that. So Paula, if you want to go to the next slide. So just a brief recap from Gabe's discussion. the key points of the DEP amendments to its stormwater rule, mandatory use of green infrastructure BMPs to manage stormwater close to the source, treat stormwater runoff through infiltration into the subsoil, treat stormwater through filtration by vegetation or soil, storing stormwater runoff for reuse, and the goal is to create hydrologically functional landscapes to maintain or reproduce the natural hydrologic cycle for the developed area. So you can go to the next one. So the goals, there's going to be a bunch of overview slides, and then we will drill down into the details. But the goal of the amendments is to, like I just said, harmonize the CMP stormwater provisions with DEP's new rule in a manner that's best suited for the Pinelands area. We also wanted to make sure that we were continuing to strengthen and enhance stormwater management in the Pinelands areas while establishing reasonable requirements for home builders and developers. And of course, with all of the concern about climate change, we wanted to make sure we were doing what we could to minimize the impacts of increased stormwater runoff due to climate change. So again, these are the major changes. We'll get into detail in further slides, but the first change would be to require stormwater management for minor residential development and some minor non-residential development. The second big change would be to incorporate DEP's provisions on waivers for meeting stormwater management on site. Right now, we specifically say, the CMP specifically says that DEP's rules on exceptions don't apply, and we had our own language, but as I'll get into later, in their amendments, in DEP's amendments, they provide a lot more detail that staff thinks is actually really helpful and beneficial to the process. And the third one is to add a specific recharge standard for nitrogen removal that right now neither the DEP rule or the CMP has. So the areas where the CMP will exceed DEP standards through proposed additions, what I just went over, the requiring stormwater management for minor residential and some minor non-residential, the additional conditions for off-site recharge of stormwater, and that specific recharge standard for nitrogen removal. As Ed went over in May, he did a presentation on stormwater right now in the Pinelands in the CMP, and he went over how currently the CMP standards exceed DEP standards. So these aren't new, these are in the CMP now, but we rely on the 10-year storm recharge requirement, which is a higher volume requirement than DEP, which relies on the 2-year storm. We prohibit discharging stormwater into wetlands and streams. We require special treatment of runoff from high pollutant load areas. And we have an emphasis on soil testing and as-built certification. So all of those kind of stronger requirements will stay. Next slide, Paul. So we're going to get into right now the minor residential and minor non-residential requirements. So what we're proposing is to require for minor residential development, rain gardens, pervious pavement systems, dry walls, or kind of a caveat, any other GI recharge that DEP accepts in the future that meets the CMP requirements from new roof surfaces. And again, I'll get into details in a moment on all of that. And the second big one is for minor non-residential to require stormwater management if there's an increase in regulated motor vehicle surface as defined by DEP. Okay, next one. So minor residential development. The first statement is the current CMP definition. Right now, we require stormwater management for minor development only if there's going to be a construction of new roads. So if there weren't any new roads being built, we wouldn't have any stormwater requirements. What we're proposing to change is to add a groundwater recharge requirement to prevent localized flooding and maintain KC aquifer levels based only on the size of the roof. So there's going to be some requirements for minor residential, but it will just be based on the size of the roof and none of the other, if they're building a driveway or any other impervious surfaces, we would only be focused on the size of the roof. Okay, next slide. So it would be based, like I said, on the 10-year, the storm volume from the 10-year storm generated on the roof. And that volume would have to be retained and infiltrated on site through one or more of the following green infrastructure BMPs. So those include right now, rain garden, small scale bioretention system, pervious pavement system, or a dry well. And then again, we kind of threw in the bigger, we're going to throw in the bigger one of any other. We don't want to limit it to those three. If any other green infrastructure measures kind of come up that DEP would approve for meeting groundwater discharge, recharge. So applicants for minor residential development will be required to conduct some testing, some soil and permeability tests at the site of infiltration of the GI structure. And they will also be required to provide an engineering plan showing the type and location of each green infrastructure and a cross-section drawing showing the distance from the high water table. So this would all be new. And we can get into later, like why we're going in this direction. So the next area is the minor non-residential development. So right now, minor non-residential development is not subject to stormwater management unless it meets that definition that's at the top. So the definition at the top is actually the CMP definition, but for stormwater purposes, it's within any 5-year period. So that's currently what the requirements are. If you are not meeting those requirements within a 5-year period, then you would not be subject to stormwater management. If you are constructing a non-residential use or structure on a site less than, or if your site less than 3 acres, or grading, clearing, or disturbing less than 5,000 square feet within any 5-year period, you would not be subject to stormwater management. What we're proposing is to require stormwater management for minor non-residential if the development results in an increase of 1,000 square feet of regulated motor vehicle surface, which is a new definition in the DEP's rules. And if that is the case, it will be subject to DEP's minimum design and performance standards to reduce post-construction load of total suspended solids and stormwater runoff through infiltration. So for major residential and major non-residential, no change. They've been subject to stormwater management and they would continue to be subject to stormwater management. And those are just the definitions, current definitions that would not be changed. Okay, next slide. So that second big change that I mentioned earlier is to change the what's called our exception section in the DEP in the CMP. This is for development that can't meet stormwater management requirements, and I guess I just want to add that it's not like the exception requirement. It's not like a free pass if you can't meet the requirements. It's basically if you can't meet the requirements, then you could possibly do stormwater management measures offsite, which is called mitigation. So right now, the CMP does authorize municipalities and the commission to grant waivers and exceptions for development that can't meet the stormwater management requirements. Like I said before, the CMP specifically says right now that it excludes, we incorporate DEP stormwater rule except for their provision on exceptions and waivers. What we're proposing to do is adopt their provisions now, because with the recent rule amendment, DEP has just provided a lot more detail for granting those waivers and exceptions. And we like it. We think it will definitely improve upon our current process and help with granting of those exceptions and waivers. So I'll just go through, I'll drill down a little on those. We have it divided into private major development and public development that's not linear. So not the roads and walkways kind of development. So like I said, the current CMP authorizes municipalities and the commission to grant waivers and exceptions. The guidance is a little general. The proposed change would incorporate DEP's variance rule for the granting of these. And like I said, it just provides more guidance and detail. But we do, of course, have some modifications. With all of these rules, we recognize that the Pinelands is unique, and we have concerns, additional concerns that might not apply to the rest of the state. So with all of these modifications, that was the thought process that went into it. So for the waiver and exceptions, they would be granted only to the design and performance standards that can't be met on site, like I said. So the applicant would have to show why they couldn't install any of the green infrastructure BMPs or do any other stormwater management measures that would meet the standards. You can go to the next slide. So right now, the DEP rule does require that offsite stormwater management measures occur in the same HUC 14 watershed as the major development. And we would say that it would also have to be located in the Pinelands. Now, one of the areas that we're modifying to the DEP variance rule is that, like I said, they require it to be in the same HUC 14. We're saying if no such mitigation site is available within the Pinelands area, the applicant could propose going out to the HUC 11 watershed, which is the bigger watershed. Same HUC 11 watershed as the major development, still in the Pinelands, still in the same municipality as the major development. But we're just recognizing that there could be some instances in the Pinelands where the choices are limited if you're just looking at the smaller HUC 14 watershed. So we would allow them to kind of move out to the larger watershed, the HUC 11. The proposed mitigation project has to be consistent with the stormwater management plan certified by the commission. Unless the stormwater plan doesn't provide for mitigation for the circumstances at hand. That's actually in the current rule, but it's not something that's in DEP's rule. So we're calling it a modification, but that's actually something that's in our current rule. And one other area that will be a little different for granting these exceptions is that they'll only be granted if the total volume of stormwater generated by a mitigation project equals or exceeds the volume required in the CMP. So the CMP infiltration standards exceeds DEP standards. So for public linear major development projects like roads, again, we're proposing to incorporate DEP's separate rule on waivers from strict compliance for public linear projects. Again, we're trying to maintain consistency with CMP terms. We would call it an exception. And again, the DEP's new rule just provides a lot more detail than is currently in the CMP. So basically, what the DEP rule says that an applicant can get a waiver from strict compliance from the green infrastructure recharge, stormwater runoff, and stormwater runoff quality requirements for the enlargement or an existing public roadway or railroad. Again, if the development meets certain conditions. So it provides more detail. We would be proposing just to incorporate that into our rule. The last major change is to impose a stricter recharge standard for nitrogen removal. The DEP rule requires the reduction of nutrients from stormwater runoff to the maximum extent feasible. Currently, we mirror DEP on that, but staff has come up with this proposal to put in a definitive minimum reduction requirement of total nitrogen load of 65% from the development site. And that would include permanent lawn and turf areas intended for associated with the residents or some other non-residential use. So in summary, I know that's a lot and we just kind of flew through it all. Certainly we can answer questions and staff, I'm sure, is ready to answer all questions. But just to recap, we do believe that the proposal will definitely enhance stormwater management in the Pinelands. Adding stormwater management for small-scale residential development through the use of rain gardens, pervious pavement systems, and dry wells that would not be required under the DEP rule. Same for stormwater management for the smaller scale non-residential development that would typically not be required under the DEP rule. That standard for nitrogen reduction that I just mentioned. And we do believe that in most cases, the CMP changes will result in a much larger amount of stormwater being recharged and infiltrated than the DEP stormwater rules require. And one of those reasons is because we do rely on the 10-year storm to calculate the volume of recharge versus DEP, which relies upon the 2-year storm. So we are here to answer any questions.
Okay, great presentation, Marcy. Thank you. Should we go to the other screen or you want to keep this screen up? Good. Sean, do you have any questions?
I do not right here, but I may based off someone else's comments. So I'm all ears.
Well, I thought I'd start with you. And Ed, do you have any questions?
I don't think I have any questions. It's a lot to absorb, but it sounds like this staff has done a great job. And Marcy, my commendment to you. It sounds like we're exceeding DEP standards where we can and promoting Pinelands protection value. So thank you for all the work. And I'll continue to try to absorb because I'm sure I don't absorb all of it right now.
And Mark, questions, comments?
Well, let me echo what I just said. A terrific presentation. Thank you very much, Marcy. I have one question. Could you help me understand a little better why we're talking about nitrogen standard in relation to stormwater regulations?
I think Ed would probably be the best one to answer that.
I'm sure you're right.
Well, thank you, Marcy. So, so stormwater has a significant amount of nitrogen. You'll notice that what Marcy talked about was controlling for nitrogen, not just from impervious surfaces, roads and driveways, nitrogen there generally is relatively low, except if you've got a landscaper or a homeowner who's applying fertilizers to a lawn, and that broadcast spreader is spreading that granular nitrogen onto those surfaces. So you will get some, but most of it's coming from the lawn areas, and that's because fertilizers are applied oftentimes at a greater rate than is really necessary. Animal waste, both domestic and wild. So the geese contribute significant amounts of nitrogen to the environment, and then dogs and cats and the like. You'll notice that we're controlling for nitrogen for two reasons, as opposed to nutrients in general. So nutrients in general, we're talking typically about nitrogen and phosphorus. The Pinelands Commission targets nitrogen for two reasons. One, it's the limiting nutrient in our ecosystem that typically allows for these excessive nitrogen blooms, the eutrophication system that we have.
Yeah.
We generally don't have problems with phosphorus, although it does get applied in fertilizers, because we've got iron-rich soils in the pinelands, and phosphorus tends to bind quite readily to the iron in our soils. And so it doesn't move like nitrogen does. Nitrogen dissolves into the water, and it moves without being bound up by our soil particles. So it's essentially because of the nitrogen in fertilizers, pet wastes. And we figured, Brian and I played around with some of the calculations. DEP assigns different nitrogen removal rates to different best management practices. Certain management practices or stormwater management devices, methods capture more nitrogen than others. We've essentially concluded that a developer can link two of these BMPs in series and get to 65% removal pretty readily. Any single device listed in DEP's chart will get you no more than 50%. So 50% is generally what we get if an infiltration basin, for example, is used or a rain garden is used. But what we've decided is that if you route the stormwater through a vegetated swale before you discharge it to that basin, you'll get the combined benefit of nitrogen removal from the vegetated swale, any infiltration device, the basin, and you can get to 65 reasonably. We've had people suggest to us that we should be requiring 90%. We talked amongst ourselves about that. We talked to DEP about that. There is a device that DEP proposed a couple years ago, a subsurface gravel wetland that they say gets 90% out. DEP's backtracking from some of that now. They say that that device perhaps doesn't remove nitrogen to that extent. So 65% we think is a highly protective standard, and one that could be met with a reasonable degree of effort by a developer.
Wow, I really learned something there. Thanks very much, Ed. Appreciate it.
Okay, so that's what I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to point out, I meant to say earlier that we have gone over these changes with DEP, and they are supportive of them. So just wanted to let the committee know.
All right, thanks, Marcy.
Okay. So the minimum 65% reduction is using a vegetative swale. Is that how that is measured?
That's correct. That's one example. So if you were to route that stormwater, if it was to flow through a vegetated swale or conveyance and then discharge into your basin, you would get the combined benefit of the swale and the basin and get to 65%.
Because I was curious, and I think you answered my thinking. How do you measure that 65%? But it's already been measured. If you have that facility in place, then you know that you're taking 65% of the nutrients out. Can you compare different sites for the effectiveness at taking the stormwater and putting it in the ground? Is there a way to measure how effective these measures are from site to site?
Brian, do you want to take that?
I'm sorry, you mean?
Well, yeah. Can you measure how effective these measures are from site to site, and even on the same site? I mean,
to meet that percentage reduction, do you mean, or?
That would be the nutrients, but also with the taking of stormwater, discharging it into the ground? I mean, is there a way to measure how effective all these measures would be at a site?
Well, so the way that these measures are constructed is the DEP's actually put together a best management practices manual, a BMP manual, which is referenced in our regulations for use. Now, the BMP manual itself is not a regulation, it's guidance, but the DEP continually revises that, and that sets up the design criteria for each of these different measures, green infrastructure, even just for your basic infiltration basin. So there are standards that are set that have to deal with how you construct them, what kind of soils they can be put in, what the permeability of those soils are. So as long, and we ensure, and the townships have to ensure that when these measures are built, that they are built according to this kind of recipe book of how to do it. So, and really those have been developed over time by the DEP, looking at existing and studying these BMP. What we call BMPs really is just any stormwater management measure. It's best management practice, but the lingo is BMP. GI is green infrastructure, which is a BMP as well. So these have been studied over time. So I would say that kind of BMP manual recipe book is how we know over time that these BMPs have been proven to be effective.
Okay.
So one thing I would like to add with the discussion about the nitrogen removal is a lot of the new stormwater regulations that the DEP has implemented. What's changing throughout the state now is that the DEP is mandating the use of green infrastructure on a smaller basis. So instead of, say, having a site where you might have 5 acres that are draining to a basin, the regulations at the state level and what we're going to have to be doing and incorporating as well now mandates that I think the maximum drainage area to each BMP is going to be about 2.5 acres, but it's going to depend on the size of that. So what's going to happen is we're going to automatically get through that requirement smaller BMPs throughout the site. So in the case of this particular standard that we're talking about, you're typically going to see stormwater coming off of a pervious surface, or rather an impervious surface, going to a smaller green infrastructure for that smaller drainage area, and then going to another basin. So it's going to need that 65% removal just through the design, to meet the DEP standards. The one thing that we're adding with this is that we are looking at, for those areas where the stormwater is not coming off of an impervious surface, but say going from a lawn directly into a basin, which does often happen now, that the incorporation of another BMP, such as a vegetative swale or even a vegetative filter strip before it goes into that basin, is going to meet that 65% standard. So a lot of that standard that we're proposing is already going to be met through the DEP's new regulations of smaller basins throughout the site to then drain to a larger basin. But this is really to incorporate those areas that the DEP's standards are not capturing and managing.
Kind of like a fallback. If the first structures don't catch the stormwater, the last one will.
Yeah, well, and in combination it will. In combination, yeah.
Okay, great. Sean, do you have any more questions?
I do not. I'm good. Thank you, Rick.
Okay. Ed?
Yes, I do. Ed Wingrowski sort of triggered something in my mind. I mean, it sounds like that we're making enormous progress on controlling nutrient flow from non-residential and small residential facilities. And what jumped out in my mind, and this may be opening a Pandora's box, but what is the nitrogen load that's coming from the agricultural sector in the Pinelands compared to what we're trying to control here? And, are there ways that we should be, are we addressing the agricultural load and how could we or should we?
One of the planners want to take that?
Well, I think that is a question that comes up a number of times that we struggle with in relation to agriculture. The issue comes up with water, water supply as well. We looked at that too. But, the issue we have with our regulations is agriculture is largely exempt from all of what we've been talking about. They don't submit, there's no development application to review unless they're building something on the site that's not exclusively for agriculture. And then the stormwater management standards would kick in. But commission, as the rules and the Pinelands Protection Act, frankly, are structured, doesn't really have an opportunity to get involved in dealing with the impacts of pure just agriculture, farming activities in general, and stormwater management. We're really restricted to looking at actual development activity, development applications on site. So it is a limiting factor in terms of the rules. It doesn't mean it's not something we shouldn't study and understand further, but our development standards, including stormwater, we don't really have the opportunity to apply them to purely agricultural activities.
When I think of agriculture, I'm always thinking whether it's pesticides, herbicides, or fertilizers, all those things cost, or water, and having a diesel to pump the water. I think about the costs that farmers have to deal with. And I always optimistically feel that they're going to try to reduce the number of gallons of diesel, the amount of pesticides, fertilizer, and everything else in order to, cover their bottom line. But fertilizers, maybe there's some best practices there that we could talk about at some point. Certainly the Ag Service talks about that best practices with farmers on those issues, but
absolutely. Yes. The State Agricultural Development Committee, we've had a couple of presentations from them. They're certainly looking into and are interested and can regulate these activities. So in coordination with them, perhaps we could come up with some approaches.
Yeah.
Good. Mark, do you have anything else?
Nothing further, Chairman. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, my head's spinning. Great information.
I just want to, I just want to mention the next steps in the process so that you don't all think, you have to absorb everything today and be ready to vote tomorrow. Our next steps, Marcy's going to get busy drafting an actual set of rules to implement all of this, and the full rule proposal as well, all of the impact statements and the background information that goes along with that. So our hope is to have something, a draft of that for you all to look at the November P&I committee meeting. So there'll be time in between now and then if you think of questions, or if we have anything additional we want to bring to your attention, we can, there'll be time to do that. But probably the next time we'll be back in November with some additional written materials that will explain, further detail all of the standards that we're proposing that we talked about today. So good to see that. But certainly in the meantime, if you have questions or, concerns pop into your head as you're thinking about the presentation, which I think we will post on our website, so you'll be able to refer to that pretty easily, please let us know as we move along through the process. But DEP, and Marcy mentioned DEP, we did meet with DEP to go over all of this. They, their rules are gonna start taking effect in March. So we're trying to keep that in mind for the Pinelands municipalities. They've been able to tell our towns to hold off on adopting anything as the commission works through our own rulemaking process, but we don't want there to be too much of a gap. So that's why you'll see we're going to be making a real push to get this set of rules proposed and out for public review as soon as possible, hopefully by the end of the year. And then we'll move through that process. But we'd like to put our towns in a position of being able to adopt a new stormwater ordinance, not too long after the DEP deadline, but within a few months. That would be good for everybody.
This topic certainly is relevant to the Lucy's committee, I think. What do you think, Mark?
It's true. I mean, obviously, as we look to amend our stormwater regulations, we've got to think about what are the, are we also addressing climate mitigation? So I appreciate your referencing that, Chairman, and obviously that's what we hope to be doing as we talk about our proposed amendment to the CMP2 to make sure that climate mitigation is among the tools that we get to apply in our policies.
Chairman
It's one
Perky, can I-
box we can check off. You know, we've covered the stormwater issues. Was there a question from somebody?
Yeah, Chairman Prickett, I was hoping to add one additional point along those lines. So Executive Director Wittenberg, I think, introduced the topic as saying that there's a lot wound up in this proposal that relates to climate change. And indeed there is. One of the things I don't think we really went into in much detail. So, but I think we talked about it previously. So DEP is looking at revising their criteria that defines the 100-year storm, the 10-year storm, the 2-year storm. And what they've identified is that the data that they're working with is at least 20 years old and is not, perhaps is not reflective of current storm total events.
Right.
And we've referenced DEP's rule in a way that allows our rule to basically change as they change their rule without us having to go back and revise anything.
Okay.
So they've told us that in the interim, they're proposing to increase the total volume from some of these storm events by about 30%.
Yeah.
So when they adopt that rule, our rule will automatically change. And so if the 10-year, 100-year storm generates more water, we will automatically capture in our rule a requirement to recharge that larger volume. So we have addressed climate change in kind of an automatic way by virtue of having adopted that rule.
No, that sounds great. And it's just that at the moment, those considerations are below the surface. I mean, the public doesn't get to see that we're making those changes because of our consideration of climate change, because right now the CMP does not give us the authority to apply climate mitigation as a rationale for our policies. And what we're doing at the moment with Lucy's committee, the climate committee, is trying to come up with some language that we can put forward to the full commission hopefully by the end of the year, my optimistic goal, that would allow us to at least lay that foundation to say that the Pinelands Commission is empowered to consider the effects of climate change and its mitigation in our policies and practices.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions regarding this topic? All right, I think we need to move on to public comment. Please call in now if you'd like to participate in public comment. The call-in information is on the screen.
Yeah.
And while we're waiting for calls, Nancy, we don't have any reason to go into closed session, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Jessica, I heard you say something. What did
we have a caller? Yes.
We have a caller?
Yes.
Okay.
Good morning, caller. Please state your name for the record.
Hello, this is Fred Akers from the Great Egg Harbor Watershed Association.
Good morning, sir.
Fred.
Good morning. I was watching intently your meeting, and I really liked what I heard, and for a lot of reasons. The committee and the staff is very diligent in attention to water issues. One of our concerns is the cumulative impact of the out-of-basin transfers from both Winslow and Monroe, and staff mentioned both of those and the chairman in the meeting today. So any way we can get more water in the ground up in those areas in the headwaters of the watershed is a focus that I think is important for river flows. And so I'm happy to hear about this new stormwater rules. It sounds great. And I just want to give a quick update that we are focusing on a part of the watershed that is not in the Pinelands. There's about 15,000 acres west of the river, mostly in Winslow, that's not in the Pinelands. And we're working on repairing a basin there. And I mentioned that at your last meeting. And since then, I ran that by the mayor of Winslow, and they're very excited to give us permission to pay to have that basin reviewed, and maybe we can figure out a way to get more water in the ground there. Also, the Camden County Soil Conservation District is on board, helping us do some research and supporting that. So anyways, keep up the good work, and hello to everybody. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Fred. Have a nice weekend.
All right, you too.
Any other callers, Jessica?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Good morning, caller. Please state your name for the record.
This is Ryan Greck from Highlands Preservation Alliance.
Good
Good
morning.
morning, Ryan.
Good morning. Thanks for the opportunity to comment. Thank you to the staff for the presentation on the stormwater rules. I look forward to, like everybody, just kind of taking some time to review the presentation and sort of digest everything. But just a couple of quick questions popped into my mind. One is, I believe it was Brian briefly mentioned that part of DEP's new regulations involve sort of reducing the actual land area that can drain to a single stormwater, sort of management structure. And I believe he said it's about 2.5 acres now with their new rules. So I'm curious as to why the commission would not include something like that, or maybe an even stricter number for within the Pinelands areas, basically emphasizing the same thing, or like I said, even making it more stricter to reduce the area and more locally treat stormwater. And then my second thought about it was, and Susan briefly touched on this, but I'm wondering how long Pinelands municipalities will have to actually adopt their ordinances to stay in compliance with the CMP once the new rule is adopted by the commission. That's it for me. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Ryan. Have a nice weekend.
You
Brian,
too. Thanks.
Brian, would you like to respond?
Yeah, sure. Hi, thanks for the questions. So the DEP's rules will be incorporated by reference, so that requirement will be throughout the Pinelands as well. Now, I do want to mention currently the CMP has a requirement that stormwater BMPs must be used. They must, and the regulation states that to the maximum extent, smaller, more spatially distributed infiltration measures shall be used throughout the site. So we do apply that, and this is something I'm actually the person in regulatory programs who reviews all stormwater management throughout the Pinelands, and we do make sure that multiple measures throughout the site are being incorporated. Most cases that can be done. There are some cases where it's not possible just because of an overly developed site or a small commercial site, for instance. So we already have that requirement. However, it doesn't lay out any specific guidance to mandate, the number, the drainage area, whatever, what have you. So incorporating the DEP's requirement now, where they do limit the drainage area for each BMP, actually does accomplish our goals more. It doesn't mean that we can't require, or that the particular development itself may lend itself to, more measures than just taking like an average of the size and saying, okay, every 2.5 acres needs to drain, to a BMP. Typically, sites when they're developed, they're not going by the size of the drainage area, and your actual drainage areas might be smaller. So we haven't talked about limiting the area further than what is required by the DP, but I think what it's going to accomplish is we are going to have a lot of developments that are going to have smaller drainage areas going to those. And now that with this DEP requirement, we have a more specific regulatory mandate to have more developed throughout the site. And it's also going to be a benefit to developers as well, because it's going to be more predictable for them as opposed to just kind of guessing the number of stormwater infiltration measures are going to have. So we'll have to see how that plays out once we start getting development applications. But I think in the end, we're really going to wind up with something that meets the intention that we had from the beginning, but just has more specifics.
Thank you, Brian. Nancy, do you want to address Ryan's second part of her question, or second question, having to do with how soon after the stormwater rules are approved by DEP will the commission take them up, put them, I think, into standards?
Well, that's what we're working towards now.
Okay, same thing, same track.
Well, so sort of. So whenever the commission amends the CMP itself specifies that Pinelands municipalities have to adopt those amended requirements within a year. Okay. So they have a year to do it. We will, in this case, for stormwater, once the commission has authorized the formal proposal and it's out there for public review, the staff will start working on drafting model ordinances for each of our municipalities that will incorporate both the DEP standards and our own. And then once the commission hopefully adopts the amendments, we'll be ready to send those ordinances out to all of our municipalities so they can start their adoption process. Can't do that until the amendments are adopted, but we will be prepared and hopefully then have a much shorter response period. It won't take them a year. We'll be able to get through that process. They'll be able to complete the adoption process in a shorter time period. But technically speaking, they do have a year to do it. Same DEP has that same requirement, and that's why I've been referring to that March 2021. That's when DEP is going to start implementing the new rules. So municipalities outside the Pinelands area need to have their ordinances in place by then. But we're in a little bit of a different situation here. That's why we've been coordinating pretty closely with DEP to make sure the municipalities, aren't being penalized for not responding to the DEP deadline. And we will be moving as quickly as we can once the amendments are, in final form and proposed to get the ordinances drafted and be ready to go.
Great. Thank you, Susan.
Chairman, can I add one thing?
Certainly,
the first part of the question made me realize that maybe we should have said this up front, but currently the CMP incorporates by reference DEP's stormwater rules and then carves out where the modifications are. The same thing would be true here. We would be continuing to incorporate DEP's rules, but the modifications that we went over today were like the triggers for what will, trigger stormwater management through minor development and the other modifications to the exceptions. But I think it's important to just point out that we would be adopting DEP's new standards just with our modifications.
Thank you, Marcy. Anything else on this topic from this caller, from Ryan? Okay, Jessica, is there another caller on the phone?
No, sir.
Okay, so I'm going to give the public some more time to call in if they'd like. And ask Nancy, is there anything you wanted to add to today's meeting? Any reports or any comments?
Nope, I'm good.
Okay, all right. All right, so commissioners, is there anything that you'd like to add today? Any comments?
I'll just once again invite people to join us at the Lucis Committee meeting on October 7th, Wednesday morning, 9:30 a.m.
And I don't know whether it's on the website yet. Is it on the website, do you know, with the information?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
No.
I don't know. Jess, are you on the phone? No, Jess is watching on.
We have it
checking.
listed. We have it listed on the homepage and on the meetings page that the meeting is set for, I believe, October 7th.
Yeah. Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, it's there. We don't have the agenda up.
Yeah.
You do have the agenda or you don't?
Yeah.
I didn't think so. Yeah. Okay. Jessica, any other callers?
No, sir, I'm sorry.
You don't have to be sorry. Well, I'm going to close public comment and thank the callers and all the listeners participating in our meeting today. I don't really have anything at this time to add other than I'm just grateful at all the information, all the presentations and all the questions that were answered by staff in such a succinct way. So I want to thank everybody and hope everybody has a nice weekend and look forward to the Lucy's meeting not too many days from now. And so I'd like to call for a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Mark, is there a second?
I'll second Sean.
Thank you, Sean. All right. Well, all in favor of adjourning the meeting, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, guys. Have a wonderful weekend. Take care.